Welcome to Steak Bites, where we carve out space for meaningful conversations that go beyond the grill. I'm your host, Kara Smith, and today we're going to go behind the scenes of Colorado craft beef. We're not just going to dive into how we deliver a delicious product. It's about crafting something with wisdom and innovation, something that actually fuels lasting legacies. So from the ranching industry to our strategic partners, ensuring quality every step of the way, our success is built on relationships with people who share our commitment to excellence and intentionality. I'm here with my co-founder and husband, Jeff Smith. And we're going to talk about how these partnerships came to be and how they're the backbone of our business and that help us deliver more than just great beef. Let's get into it. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Thanks for inviting me on.
Well, this would be a great opportunity to, for lack of a better term, peel back the onion of the why behind Colorado craft beef. The why that we're sitting here, the why we have the strategic partners we do, and the essence of how our mindset may differ a little bit than most people in traditional ag.
Sure. There's a lot to peel back there.
So where do you want to start? Maybe our backgrounds?
This is your show.
Let's start with our backgrounds. So Jeff lovingly refers to me as the cow nerd, which I can't say is completely off base. I have dedicated my entire life and career to the cattle side of what we do now here at CCB. But being born as a fifth generation rancher here on the ranch that literally the homestead is half a mile from where Jeff and I currently are sitting, literally just across the wall from each other, but having a little more of a nuanced, structured conversation around what the future will look like for the next generation, for our children, for the sixth generation of now Smiths that are on this place. That was something that definitely was much. It took a lot of thoughtfulness, took a lot of contemplation to realize that when we move back to the ranch, that we would like to do more than just have a legacy piece of land. We would like to build a legacy business. Jeff, would you like to dive into that?
Yeah. I refer to you as the cow nerd on every channel I get a chance to, from Andy Stump or Mike Glover or any of our barbecue friends. I've shouted that from the mountaintops in a good way, where, it's pretty funny. I remember being a nerd in grade school. And then by the time I got to high school, I was like, I may be a nerd, but one day you're going to work for me. And being a nerd is a good thing. But when I really, think about what I do, I refer to myself as the money nerd. And I've come from a finance background. I did some time in private equity, just like you did. I did time in corporate sales. I also have a very big operational background in construction and supply management and just any number of different skill sets that really played into what we do as a company. But I think what you touched on in the opening is the most important. It's relationships. Because although I am the money nerd, outside of transactional business, whether or not a check will clear the bank, everything in a company is dependent on the people. You can't fully automate anything. The team has to be aligned. And when I talk to people about what we do, or I've actually heard our partners talk about what we do, the combined skill sets that we bring are awesome, but in the fact that they're mutually beneficial and non-competitive, that is something that so many people miss. I was recently on a podcast, and I think I described, I'm 3 inches deep and 2 miles wide. I can talk accounting, finance, sales, all these crazy different things and get very creative. Or, for instance, I just had to reconfigure our router so we could do this. I became the IT guy because the router crashed. Luckily, I have that skill set. I can adapt very, very quickly. but I'm not near the level of competent in my areas as you are in yours. So I do talk to people and I say, yeah, I'm 3 inches deep and 2 miles across. I can cover a lot of ground really quickly. But with what we do with cattle and what you've turned our cattle program into, it requires a specialist that is 6 inches wide and 3 miles deep. And where some people would find that a challenge or a potential reason for angst or confrontation or competition, I think you and I, but also all of our partners, value the input of everybody on the team and the skill sets they bring to bear with no ego. And that is something that I wish I could find a better way to talk about instead of rambling for 2.5 minutes.
That's something that I talk about a lot, is the fact that we do have collaborative skill sets in nature. That's something that sometimes is not probably has enough light shed on it, or has it maybe put on a proverbial pedestal per se. Not only in a marriage but a business, and being able to grow and build something and be able to truly build a legacy, which the legacy piece is a big part of what we do. It's a big part of what we were founded on, is a ranching legacy, that heritage, those values that come along with it. But that's not to say that doesn't continue through everything that we do, the way we do it in such an intentional fashion, but also into our customers. That's part of our ethos as a business and a company, is to help our customers fuel their own legacy. And that's something that I know we both share, is to be able to put good out in the world, to help other people continue to build their own legacies, with a lot of these thought processes in mind.
I would, I totally agree with that, but I also wonder how you define the legacy. If somebody's still ranching here 100 years from now, that's a pretty easy legacy to define, especially if it is, an extension of your family that's already been here for 5 generations. But I also wonder, with the widespread good vibes, for lack of a better term, that we try to put out with the company, what that legacy does start to become, because it is not as siloed as it has been for 110 years. We talk to our competitors, we help our competitors. Heck, with our harvest facility, we harvest for our competitors. Our competitors couldn't business without us doing that with them. That is very uncommon from an ethos standpoint in agriculture, especially in such a competitive nature business as direct-to-consumer food production. I think the legacy, if we do it right, will transcend the ranch. And I think showing that opportunity to our girls and showing that opportunity to the industry is more of what I really drive, internally.
Yeah, it's we talk a lot about the mission of the company, and a lot of that's around wisdom and innovation, and sometimes those don't go together, but they very easily can. It's like the old saying of kind of like having the wisdom to know the difference. There's a lot of things to peel back in that. But I think we both can share in the fact that we functioned in traditional ag. Some people call it conventional ag, whatever you want to say, for the majority of our careers. And then we took a step back to just make sure that we were being very intentional about what we were going to put out in the world. And I remember distinctly the conversation we had when we launched the company, of, without a doubt, we were not going to demonize the rest of the industry because we all are in this together. We were going to market what we're doing on the attributes of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And now the people that we're doing it with the collaborations and the partnerships and some of the things that have been put together that are very special. But never going down the route of saying ours is better because theirs is bad. I think if we stand on why ours is good, why ours is what it is, and why we're different, not necessarily why somebody else is bad. And that's something that the rest of the industry, particularly the food industry, I would say, has a little bit of a struggle in.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to a very myopic view in agriculture. Uh, as much as we've both traveled around, I know you've been mainly on the ruminant side, bison, cattle, some sheep. I think you did some work in the deer space for a while. And not to take away from that, I've probably worked in 50 different commodities in processing environments across the country, with some exposure in Europe and South America. And for me to answer, hey, is this good or bad, regardless of what the ag practice may be, I can't do it. Because if you're growing garbanzo beans in Arizona, or you're growing them in Washington, or you're growing them in Turkey, the practices will be different. They aren't better or worse because typically they're dictated by your region. And I think for any agriculturalist, true agriculturalist, to stand on a mountaintop and say, how I do whatever I do in Southern Illinois is better than anybody that does it with this other method is either willful ignorance or a lack of knowledge. Because just because you do it that way, and that's the best way where you're at, doesn't mean that that's the best way everywhere. And I think that is what we're trying to talk through with some of the steadfastness of what we do is, hey, we can't grow cattle in Colorado the same way people do in the Central Valley of California or in South Texas or wherever you want to look. It's all very different. And that encouragement of the difference and the understanding of the different values is a big thing. And being able to talk about how you grow it is a big thing. But to begin to put down another operation, regardless of their location, because 10 miles away from where we're sitting, the ground is very different. You're on the Platte River. You suppose you do ground or do ag a little differently next to one of the biggest river systems in the country. And for anybody to have a very staunch opinion that you must do it XYZ, I think is just a little too binary of a stance to have for marketing if you're truly trying to do good business.
That's fair. So, Jeff, you did mention all of the different ag commodities that you have functioned in. This is something we talk about a lot, but I actually think our listeners could get a little more insight into a lot of this. If you want to touch on how different that really is comparatively. So I have functioned very siloed my entire life and career within the cattle space, which it still is very segmented from the time a calf is born, and then they move on to, the stocker, the yearling part of the cattle business, then move on to typically the feed yard setting, and then on to the processor, and then they're in the meat world, which is, as we know now, very different than just the cattle space. Yet all of these different ag commodities, and frankly what it takes to feed people, is very nuanced in many, many different fashions.
Yeah, how would you like me to drill into that? Because that could be a 30-minute diatribe if we're not careful.
I know. Let's, from a high level, say how what we've learned at this point, putting our supply chain together, and how now we do see even this particular segment, we see the beef industry quite a bit different than we did, I'd even say, a year ago, but particularly 6+ years ago before going direct to consumer. How that kind of enlightened us in many fashions, but also maybe just the process, not even a particular ag commodity, but highlighting how segmented and frankly how many hands actually do touch ag products before they ever get to somebody's plate.
Sure. So before I dive into that, I'll rattle off a quick list of different commodities I've worked within and different industries I've worked within, just so people get an idea of the complexity of the systems I've had to work in. Um, I've worked in the entire brewing industry, from barley and hops to malted barley, in the rice industry in Arkansas, where Budweiser brings most of their rice, or grows most of their rice, and puts it through a plant in Jonesboro. I've worked in the nut industry to include peanuts and pecans and pistachios. I've worked in basically any type of grain you can think of, grass seed coating. I've worked in sheetrock plants. I've worked in cat litter plants. I've worked in fish food and pet food plants, and just literally any type of dry, flowable commodity you can think of. The oddest one being gunpowder. I did not work in the gunpowder factory. They would not let me in the gate because I was just a lowly salesman, but they knew exactly what they wanted. We shipped them product. In every one of those value chains has a way that it functions. But what a lot of people miss is how those things function and how they must function together. So, for instance, the cat litter industry. All those cat litter plants, of which in the US there are 3 major cat litter facilities, are built next to a bentonite mine, because bentonite is the most dense, hardest to move product in that value chain. So they move the processing to the raw commodity. Makes sense. If you look at the flour industry, I worked on a project where a company out of Denver was trying to build a flour mill in West Virginia, because it was cheaper to rail raw wheat to West Virginia than it was to process in a facility near the Midwest and truck all the finished flour over. And that was strictly due to the population density of the Northeast. Because if you look at a heat map of the population density of the US, 1/3 of our entire population lives in a very, very small window in the Northeast. And to think about that flour mill, that investment would have been $100 million easy. So if we think about all the choices and decisions that go into those couple of examples, cat litter or flour milling, which are really not that necessary for nutrition, right? We don't really have to have wheat and flour. I could argue the carnivore diet. We're in the meat space. That'd probably be a good marketing move. But all the way down to how cattle move, how cattle function, where cattle are fed, the climate that goes into it, and frankly, not the stair step effect. Like we had one thing and then this happened. No, you need to go third or fourth level in all of this stuff. The weirdest one is when you watch a processing facility of an ag commodity go up in a certain region. It changes the entire economics of the cattle feeding space within about 100 miles. Nobody thinks about that. Well, nobody that's not in the industry doesn't think about that. I mean, if you start building a sunflower crush facility somewhere in western Kansas, and there's an ethanol plant 10 miles away that releases distillers grains for the feed industry, it collapses that local market. It could make that ethanol plant unprofitable, which then drives the subsidy conversation around ethanol production so that gasoline can be cheaper and we can have higher, more efficient burning vehicles. So a sunflower plant could totally change a ton of stuff, liquidate an ethanol plant, and then require legislation at a national level to subsidize other industries. And every one of these industries is interconnected to another industry. Because if that ethanol plant goes offline, then you have a corn basis drop. Like, and that's the one thing so many people don't see is it's a cascading effect that, a lot of our military friends talk about second, third, fourth level effects. By the time it trickles down in some of these agricultural hiccups, which are super micro regional, they are not even statewide events. They are county-wide events. Especially somewhere like Western Kansas or Eastern Colorado, where we live, you could be talking a very big job swing in the local economy. And all of that to be said that at the end of the day, we still are required to provide food and nutrition for the population.
It is a system. It's a big, complex system. And I'd like for you to dive into of where we came from and where we are now, particularly with CCB, of course, as far as our supply chain, the systems, the strategic thought process behind that, and strategic partnerships. That's a core piece of us is the partnerships, the collaboration, thinking kind of outside the box, I would say, doing things out of the traditional norm, innovation, however we would like to call that. Could you touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we started small. And I haven't seen the data in a couple of years, but pre-COVID, the average size of a direct-to-consumer beef company was a company that harvested approximately 31 head a year. That was average, which sounds like a fair number of cattle, which it is. It's a whole semi-load annually. That's a fair amount of beef to move. But from an economic standpoint, it's not enough to feed a family, which lends itself to say, okay, mathematically, where do we want to go? If we're going to start this company, where do we go? And I'm happy to say that the first full year we had shipping product, we were about 60% over the national average pre-COVID. And then COVID happened. And, without boring everybody with all the details, as the company grew, we began to see some of the strategic holes that we had developed. Hey, if we do this, we have this problem. If we do this, we have that problem, similar to what I just talked about. So we're applying that same outside industry knowledge to the depth of what we want to do as a company. And in that, we expanded. We built the building we're sitting in so we can ship from the ranch. We started, I think our first employee was in 2021. That was a pretty big move. 2022, we took down our own feed yard. That was no small task. And 90 days after we took it over, we promptly had a fire and burned down half the equipment 3 days after Christmas. No big deal. Adapt and overcome. But generally speaking, in business, since we've met, we're coming up on 10 years married in approximately 2 months. And it has always been relationship driven. You don't make business decisions on sheer monetary reasons because that just is not sustainable. You have to be building a network. And that is how we were able to take over the feed yard we took over, because we'd been there for years. And the gentleman that, we formed the partnership with and took over the yard from is now a business partner of ours in a couple other ways. That is, in my humble opinion, proof that we're doing things right. And after 13 months of work, in August of 23, we signed a partnership with Jocko Willink and Leif Babin and Dave Burke and Brian and Pete from Origin and Jocko Fuel. And that was the same thing we'd been doing for years. And that is what I think some people have missed. We were building a relationship-based business that happens to sell beef. And it happens to sell darn good beef because of the team we have. And by building the team and being very strategic in the team members we chose. My analogy of being 3 inches deep and 2 miles wide, we just made the pond bigger. We didn't worry about building a bigger dam. We didn't worry about digging it out to make it bigger. We made the pond bigger with the right relationships, and with the right relationships of people that shared our mission. And with that partnership, we were finally able to acquire our own harvest facility. And then through the relationship we had with the harvest facility owner, who's a classmate of mine from college, he stayed on to run the facility as a business partner. Another feather in our cap of doing good business, of being good partners. Because most guys that run a harvest facility know how hard it is for direct to consumer to work, because they've seen 30, 40, 50 companies try to come in and start and fail, because it's not easy. If you want to go national, it's actually probably easier to go national because you're not trying to hammer the same audience all the time, but that creates its own set of challenges. But I think the true testament of, or the true definition of what we've done, is used a relationship-based servant leadership model in our marriage and in our family and in our company that has allowed us to find great teammates, great employees, and literally every employee we have right now within the beef company is a partner. And I think the manifestation of that is impossible to ignore, and it's impossible to slow down. And that is why my hair is getting back behind my headphone line, and it's changing colors. But at the end of the day,
I blame that on our second born, but that's just from
that's
my
fair.
own perspective. So
yeah, I could see that. But it's so interesting. People say karma's a thing or karma is not a thing. Well, I lean towards karma really matters a lot, because this journey has not been without its issues. It's not been without its really hard days. I had one of those just last week. But on that particular phone call, which for anybody listening, it was brutal. It was the most brutal phone call I've ever had in my career, which is saying something, because I was a construction person for the government for 7 years. And I'm happy to say that I got an email back today that might be turning around, because I chose not to go nuclear on the phone call. I wanted to. Every part of me wanted to fight. And I kept my cool. I was strategic in my thoughts, and I didn't say what would have felt the best. And that is something that I did not learn in agriculture. And as much as I love agriculture, and I've said this on other podcasts, I love how independent ag people are. And I am also absolutely offended by how independent ag people are sometimes, because we could do so much more together.
yeah, that collaboration mindset is something that we talk about a lot. We talk about you don't necessarily have to just take your cut out of the pie. You make that pie bigger, and then everybody can have a bigger slice to the pie. But sometimes that mindset is lost.
Well, I mean, even when the deal with Jocko and the rest of our awesome partners were announced, we had other ag people we know reach out to us and say, hey, why didn't you invite us into the deal? And these are individuals that hadn't really been a part of our business network, hadn't reached out. They hadn't built that relationship with us to get that phone call. But at the end of the day, they thought they needed it. I find that very interesting.
Yeah, I would add one thing to this discussion from, collaboration, partnerships, etc., kind of thinking about things a little bit differently, is also making sure that we mention our customers. As our customers, that was actually a big mindset shift for me, because I functioned on the ranching side of the business. I was in animal health for 10 years, and you'd walk onto an operation and you'd ask them, so, what kind of business are you in? What do you sell? And most of them would say, I sell a 600-pound calf the second week of October. I'm like, actually, you're in the beef business, because that's what we're selling. And if we don't have a consumer, demanding our product, we really don't have the livelihood of what we do. And we have incorporated the mindset of our customers are our hero, and we're the guide. It's not the traditional mindset of I'm the hero because I'm providing food for you. This is a choice and a path that we chose. And we love that, being able to provide high quality beef for people to enjoy, and then connect back with it, get back to nature, get back to whole foods, a lot of the things with it. But it really is their story. We're fueling their story so they can go create their own legacy.
Well, it's that extension of servant leadership. I was just on Greg Anderson's podcast in Seattle, the Endless Endeavor podcast, for anybody that wants to look it up. And I talked about, at some point our company outgrew us. And, when I held our oldest daughter for the first time, I was like, holy crap, it's no longer about me or Kara. I didn't have that gut check moment with our company. It just happened. And there are certainly people that depend on us to provide them food. And those are our employees, and those are our customers. And to anybody that says, oh, you're an entrepreneur, you're the boss, I'm like, not really. I could send you a customer list, and those people are my boss. Because, just no different than when we finally got to an inventory level that we could do a steak only box. People asked for that for like 8 months. And we finally built inventory to do that. People said, hey, we really want to see this. And we moved that direction. But you only get that feedback if you're asking for it and if you're earning it. And that servant leadership saying, hey, guys, we're here to help you. What can we do? And we earned a lot of that during COVID by our ability to execute. And to everybody's knowledge, we were back ordered for 8 straight months. We did not come out of a back order status till the week before Thanksgiving. It was an absolute nightmare for 8 months, up at 4 a.m., sending emails, harvest a certain number of cattle, bring them here, immediately pack them. They went out the next day and we were out of beef again. And I am thankful for that opportunity, because it tested our systems. It tested me. But it also built a level of loyalty with a lot of our customers, that they knew we were there for them too. And, for everybody that wants to be very negative about the direction of our country and the direction of society, I understand. But I would like everybody to hear that in the hundreds and hundreds of interactions I had that year, I did not have one angry customer. I didn't have one person being evil towards another human. There were people I said, hey, you're going to get your order. It's going to ship Monday. And on Sunday afternoon, I get an email from a first responder or a nurse or a doctor or an elderly person that was scared to leave their home. And I would bump the order I told you were going to get on Monday to send it to somebody else. And I said, hey, I'm really sorry. This person needs it. I had to make a judgment call. I will get you on the next one. I apologize. And I never had a blow up. To watch the community respond like that, even at a very small level, because at that point we were much, much smaller than we are now, was very uplifting. And that servant leadership mindset that I feel like we were putting into the universe was being given back, because we earned the right to say those things. It's not that we were in a position to tell someone. We did our very best to be a partner. And that is why we refer to Brian and Pete and Jocko and all the guys. They're our partners, full stop. And our customers are our partners, full stop. And I think that type of messaging and mindset is one thing, but showing it and treating people that way is really what makes it work.
There's many things that I think we could dive into with that conversation around COVID and supply chain disruptions and all of the things that were going through people's minds and the things that they physically were going through. I do remember, though, just feeling so blessed that we did know where our food was coming from. And, it was 50 feet away from our house. And that's the first time in my life and your life and a lot of other people's lives that they've ever experienced something like that.
I think your dad said that, right?
Yeah, well, that was when I looked at it generationally. My grandparents, of course, they did, but really, yeah, my sort of dad's generation, all the way through, where we currently were sitting, we had not experienced being concerned about where our next meal was coming from, and that changes a lot. And of course, we had a 10-week-old baby. That also changed our mindset about the thought process of feeding people and our own security in that. And I think that's something that sometimes our memories are a little bit short-lived, but something to always keep in mind. Yet, I do think a lot of consumers are much more keen to where their food comes from and how it was produced and all of the details now post-COVID as pre-COVID. And I'd say that a lot of the direct-to-consumer side is testament to that, to be a little bit closer to where your food comes from. And to your point about relationships, that's something that we don't take for granted, is to be able to answer those questions of how beef is produced, why we do what we do in the middle of nowhere in Northeast Colorado to produce beef how we do.
Yep. I think it's an interesting dichotomy when you think about all of it, because there's a lot of people in the direct-to-consumer space that really, if they could wave a magic wand, the big four would go away tomorrow. They don't realize that without the big four, there's going to be a big problem. And I'm not saying that we need to love the big four and encourage them to do what they do, because there's certainly things they should do better. But I don't see a mathematical way to change that in the next 5 years, let alone the next 5 minutes. And to anybody listening, we support local agriculture, but we are also pretty good at math. And local agriculture in the beef space accounts for 15% of the national production. And most of that is still going out on trucks. If it all moves to UPS and small trucks tomorrow, people are going to have a problem. So if you want to support a system, if you think you want more people to do more local, we support that. The votes that happen with that particular thought is your dollar. Because the more support local producers have, or whatever system you prefer, the more they can build their business, the more they can function. But at the same time, Kara and I have spent hours talking about this. We can never produce product for the price that Walmart does, or Target does, or King Soopers does. And that's okay. Because if that's where you need to buy your beef to feed your family, we support your ability to do that, and we encourage you to do that too.
Yeah, one comment that I've made on quite a few other podcasts, and I think it's good food for thought from a consumer perspective, is a lot of times when we get caught up in some of the nuances, particularly, for example, within the beef chain, of what label is on that steak that you're going to buy, wherever that may be. Think about it from maybe a more zoomed out perspective of, if I get to choose from let's call it a supermarket steak. You don't know necessarily where it came from. You're going to your local grocery store and you're picking up a steak to feed your family. You have that choice, or you have the choice to walk down the center of the grocery store aisle and pick up a box of organic macaroni and cheese, for example. Let's think about that choice. Let's choose the high quality protein. Let's choose the whole foods. Let's not get hung up on the marketing and the labels that went into that. Like, let's think about it from a different perspective of choosing, the nourishment and the fuel versus maybe the marketing label. And then another layer of that, with you're talking local agriculture, thinking about the people that you are supporting by voting with your dollar to purchase those products, directly or indirectly.
Yeah. Because if you're buying beef, you're still supporting the cattle industry.
You are 100%.
I mean,
that's what we
produce.
Yeah,
people will argue import versus all these other things. I get it. That's a conversation for another day. But generally speaking, if you're buying whole muscle cuts, it is likely U.S. beef. It's secondarily likely to be Canadian or Mexican, potentially. Outside of that, most of the imported beef is lean trim that goes into burger. And that's just how the industry works. So if you're buying whole muscle steaks, it's likely not imported. Now, there's probably going to get blasted on social media with somebody with a picture or something from Uruguay, but we'll see. But don't listen to the hype. Go make an informed decision. And if that's the steak you can afford, or that's the steak you want to buy today, do that. Because the cattle industry is still getting some of that money.
So, Jeff, do you have some closing thoughts for our listeners?
I mean, I already said vote with your dollar. That's usually my mic drop moment.
Any other things from our own company perspective you'd like to leave people with? Like to call it our food for thought.
I mean, I think we owe a big debt of gratitude to everybody that listens and everybody that supports our company. That's the very first thing, because this company has become something that we didn't think it would ever get here. And quite frankly, it's burning red hot at the moment in a good way. And that's because of people buying product. That's not because of partnerships. That's not because of good steak. That's because of people buying product and people supporting what we're doing. So, that would be my very first thing. It's just thank you guys for whatever you're supporting. And if it's us, we appreciate it. And, be intentional, whatever it is. And that is something I struggle with. That's something everybody I know struggles with. But, to Kara's comment about organic mac and cheese or a steak on the side of the grocery store, I like me some mac and cheese. Don't get me wrong. That's a heck of a cheat meal. But be intentional in that decision. One of our other investors is Chris Cavallini. And Chris is a solid guy. And he and I were talking. He goes, yeah, because we were talking about, hey, you're really fit. Do you drink alcohol? Do you do this? He goes, yep. But if I drink alcohol and I go out one night, the next day I have to do 2 workouts. He's like, that's my penance for going. Like, that is the intentional movement that he makes. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So if you're being intentional, you're holding yourself accountable and you're trying to make more better decisions. Notice, I'm not saying perfect. Perfect is not a concept. Perfect is an idea that's unattainable. But try to make more better decisions.
Thanks for sharing your insights today, Jeff. It's clear that partnerships and collaborations are at the heart of what we do and our mission to deliver more than just flavor. We're creating something that actually lasts. To our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode and it gives you a better understanding of how collaboration and partnerships not only fuel our business, but our entire food system. If you're interested in supporting American-made, intentionally raised beef and want to learn more about our journey, follow us on our website or any of our social media channels. Till next time, keep pursuing quality, intentionality, and integrity in everything you do. Stay inspired, be engaged, and let your actions craft a legacy